What's it like to live abroad? Coming up. Hello and welcome back to the Freelanceverse. So I'm filming this video from Brussels, Belgium, and I'm originally from Switzerland. This raises a lot of questions in the comments. Why do I live here? Why did I move abroad? How do I experience living abroad, etc. So I thought it would be great to make a dedicated video about this. Because this channel is about freelancing, freelance translation, and it turns out a lot of people move abroad that do this job for some reason. And it is quite funny. When I first went to an information event of my university in Switzerland, one of the things they said, if you want to start these studies, make sure you're comfortable with working abroad potentially. And I found that interesting, and in retrospect, like a lot of my friends live abroad now, so I guess it does. I don't know what it is, but something with studying languages makes you want to go abroad, I guess, or just gives you more opportunity that your life can take this path. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of show you from my experience the pros and cons of living in a different country. I have been living abroad for many years now and in the various countries. The first time I went abroad was in 2011. I went to France. To the west of France, to Bordeaux. In retrospect, I wouldn't call that living abroad, because this was with the intention to go there and learn French and then come back and start my studies, right? And that's kind of different than actually living somewhere and start to build your own life in a location. The other is more like an exchange, like a student's exchange. Then I also lived for an extended period of time in Dublin, in Ireland. The first proper moving away from moving my center of living away was to the Netherlands. I lived in Nijmegen. It's a nice little town in the east of the Netherlands. And then my next and so far last stop is here in Brussels, Belgium. And I still like it very much, so I can definitely recommend. It's not the prettiest town in terms of like sightseeing possibilities, but to live here you can really make an excellent life if you like immerse yourself in the culture. So here on my phone I wrote down a few pros and cons that I experienced in the last, let's say, 6 years of living abroad off and on. So the first point I have here is probably the most obvious one: expanding your worldview, exploring new cultures. That's pro number one. And immediately on the con list, you're losing another culture, right? Loss of culture. What I mean by that is your cultural values that you grow up with, all my Swiss values, I still have them in me, of course, but they become a bit muddled. You don't feel that connected anymore to Switzerland or to your home country when you've been away for that long. I still go there all the time. This is one of my homes there, definitely, and I feel very connected to the Swiss people, not only because, or maybe also due to the fact that I work for them, basically, right? I do a lot of localization text for the Swiss audience, so I need to stay in touch with the cultures there. And I think I'm doing a good job with that. But of course, the big pro of moving abroad is experiencing different cultures. Your whole worldview changes, I think, once you get out of your comfort zone, once you go somewhere else. The whole world seems smaller for some reason. Like before I lived here, I would have never imagined that to just go, hop on a train and go to Belgium and back, for a week, that seemed like it's a huge undertaking, right? It's a huge holiday. And now just, especially Europe feels so small now. You can just travel by train back and forth and everything is connected. It all puts it into perspective how small we are. Talk to so many different cultures, especially here in Brussels. It's very common for people to come here and live here for a few years as a foreigner because the EU institutions are here, right? So yeah, I have so many friends from so many different cultures, continents even. It's amazing in that regard. That leads me directly to the next pro, which is making new connections, or you can even say, I wrote in brackets, forced to make new connections, even though forced is kind of a negative term, but I would still put it in the pro list, because what this means is like when you grow up in a country and all your friends are there from back in high school, etc., and or maybe from the university, you just stay with these friends, right? You have the friends, you're content, you build a life there, and that's great. That's nothing to say against that. But you don't really make new friends anymore when you're in your late 20s or your 30s, right? It doesn't really happen naturally anymore. So when you're moving abroad, you're kind of forced to do that. And it can be really interesting because you learn a lot about yourself, right? For some people, this is really tough, moving abroad, because they are not really good in opening up to people or finding new friends. it's hard to get out there and make connections. It is definitely hard, but for me, luckily, this is quite easy to do. And wherever I go, I manage to find my group of people. I always start with a large group of people that I try to meet as many as I can, and then I narrow down to people that I realize, okay, there is something, we can be real friends. Because you don't need many real friends, right? A few of them is more than enough. And on the con side of that, of course, is that you either lose a lot of friends, it's probably gonna happen, or not really friends, but you lose a lot of connections that you had in your previous life, let's say. Your real friends, they should actually stay, but it takes a lot of effort to keep these connections going. Don't make the same mistakes that I did when I first moved away. I thought that this will just stay naturally, I will just keep in touch with my friends naturally, but it's not the case. Like the expectations or the how do you call it, the dynamics, it's expected that you, if you moved away, it's expected that you are the ones who keeps in touch, right? I don't know if that's a unwritten rule or something, but that's something I observed, and that's perfectly fine, right? I'm not complaining about that, but you need to realize that first. And then once I realized that, I started putting in a lot of effort to keep, and I say effort it's again a negative word for something positive, right? It just takes, it takes time, it takes thinking of people, it takes writing them, Skyping them, meeting them when you go back, right? And usually I go back for maybe, let's say, 10 days or so, even though I go back quite often, or very often for some people, way more than usual people who live abroad. But still, meeting with all my friends that are really important to me back there is always limited to a certain amount of time. And I try to book the people that I want to see. So it takes effort, it takes time to keep in touch, but you can definitely do it. Next up on the list is an interesting one. For me, I wrote cheaper, but in brackets, I also wrote expensive. So this really depends from which country you go to which, right? Me coming from Switzerland, almost anywhere I go, I would have it cheaper there, right? But of course, for other people, if you grow up in, I don't know, Romania, and then you move to the UK, it's probably much more expensive, or definitely much more expensive. Anyways, for me, I wrote cheaper, which is really cool, really good for me, especially also for my business. I said this many times on the channel, I don't think I would have become a freelancer in Switzerland. But when I moved to the Netherlands, I saw that there is the threshold to succeed, let's say, or to make an average living is much lower there. So that's where I started, and then I started building up. And I still had always the comparison to my Swiss friends in terms of revenue, which is a curse and a blessing both at the same time, right? Because it really pushes me to go harder and to make more money, but it's also tough because you are kind of, it's not fair in technically to compare myself to the Swiss people. But then again, my profession is not bound to a country, so why would I look at Belgian salaries and Dutch salaries, right? I need to look at something that is motivating me to do more, to go further. So money is an interesting aspect, especially coming from a non-Euro zone for me, right? It took me a while to actually start thinking in euros, and growing up, euro was always kind of it was just a holiday money for me, you know. We had this when we went to Spain or something, or to Greece, but we never. I never looked at it as real money, and now my whole business and my whole life surrounds around euros, you know. And it's interesting. It took me a good 2-3 years to actually start thinking in euros. It helps now that the currency, the exchange is almost 1-to-1, so there's not much thinking anymore in terms of whether that's a good thing or not is another question. But the obvious one is language, right? Language is a big part of my life. That's also why I enjoy being abroad. I'm very fascinated by languages, by accents, by regional idioms that you can pick up. When I was in the Netherlands, I started learning Dutch at university, and now here, when I hear the Flemish speakers, I notice a very subtle difference, but not really almost. And then they tell me what actually is the difference. It's really cool. And my French has become much better since I'm in Belgium, and I can actually use it here, because here in this commune where we live, it's very French speaking, so I use it on a daily basis, and I just feel much more confident. The level of French is probably similar, but I feel much more confident, and I just speak with making errors as well, and it doesn't bother anymore. And I think that's, once you achieve that, once you can speak without feeling humiliated, that's when you get more fluent, right? And people tell me it really doesn't matter if you say le ou la maison, it doesn't matter, right? just speak fluently, and it's considered cute when you make mistakes like that. And of course, on the con list, you have the language barrier. And that can actually be quite tricky. You know, I was lucky to not move far away, right? Or far away, let's say to a country where I'm completely lost in language. So in the Netherlands, I could speak it. Well, I went to France, Ireland, Netherlands, and Belgium. And all of these countries, I could communicate at least the required minimum, you know. But I remember in the Netherlands, I went to the tax authorities to register my business, and they said, we are legally not allowed to talk in English with you. Of course, we can speak English. In the Netherlands, almost everyone can, but in the tax office, they're not allowed to speak English. So I tried to do my best with my broken Dutch, with some German, some English, and they responded in Dutch, and it worked out fine, but that was a big language barrier at that point. Here now with the French, it's fine. Like especially German is an official language in Belgium, so all my like national things in terms of taxes, etc., I can do in German even, right? Sometimes it's questionable German, but it's still German. So the language barrier here is not too big, but of course, if you move somewhere where you're completely lost in language, then this is a very big part of moving abroad, because it comes with isolation as well, right? If you feel like not comfortable to go out there and people don't speak English in your neighborhood, then you will feel isolated, and that's a big con that I have on the list, isolation. I really recommend, I don't know if that's the same for everyone, but that's just personal experience, that only move abroad if you're okay with being alone. Me personally, I'm very okay with being alone. I enjoy my own company. I enjoy to be alone. That's also why it's good for me to work as a freelancer, because I work alone a lot, right? But yeah, your support system when you move abroad is much smaller than at home, right? Most of the problems, most of the situations you will have to deal with alone. I'm very lucky to be here with my partner, so we can support each other, like when you have to go to the emergency room or something, you know, all these things that you would maybe call your sister or your mom at home, but you can't do that. So what else do I have here? Well, new tax system, yeah, that's a con, but you can figure it out easily. Like if you try to start a business somewhere, if it's in Europe, you will not have a problem. I think if you go to Africa, South America, there maybe it's a bit, you would definitely have to look for a local to help you out with that, because maybe you need to have some tricks in mind. I'm not sure how that works. But speaking of relationship, I touched on it before. What I really noticed in our relationship, it creates such a strong bond, right? If you move somewhere together in a country that it's none of the partner's home country, you grow together so much because you're supporting each other in so many different aspects of life, right? So for a bonding experience, it's invaluable. It's amazing. Adventure as well. It's very adventurous, of course, because every day you're trying to figure out new things, and you like just when the alarm of the house is broken, you have to call the alarm guy, and you're trying to figure out what the hell. How do I explain that in French, right? So many times I have to look up words that just are not in my active vocabulary. But it's cool, it's adventurous, and there's something new to learn every day, and it pushes you out of the comfort zone, and that's something that I really enjoy, and that's the biggest point that I saved to last. My biggest pro is personal development, confidence booster. That's incredible, right? It changed me completely as a human being. I feel much more confident in myself. I feel independent. I feel empowered as well, because if you tackle something like this, it's a huge change in your life, right? And people tell you, you can always come back, it's easy. And yes, it is easy, you can always come back. But if you decide to move your center of living, if you really decide to move away and just leave everything behind, completely deregister, completely just end your life there in Switzerland, basically, I can and probably will always go back, that's fine. But it's a huge leap and something that I wouldn't want to miss in my life, because it gives me so much motivation and inspiration as well, because it really feels like for my life it gives this kind of new dimension that I probably would have missed otherwise without even knowing that it would be there. So if you are thinking about it, moving abroad, I can definitely recommend. It's tough, a lot of challenges, but so much reward as well. One thing that's super important for me is that I keep the contact with my family, with my friends, and being quite close to home, I can manage that. So I always go home by train. It takes me about 6-7 hours, and I always book first class so I can work in the train unbothered, and I can basically make the money back and even more than the trip costs, you know. So yeah, it's great. I'm actually going next week again. So I don't know how long this video is. I don't know if it was rambling, but I just wanted to share a bit of my personal story. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you're thinking of moving abroad. If you already are, where are you from? Where do you live now? I'm really interested in these kind of things. I'm actually working on a couple of big videos that, you know, that I'm always filming little clips for. And soon they should come to fruition and should be on the channel, so stay tuned for that. Make sure to subscribe and like the video. I appreciate it a lot, and I see you next Monday. Bye bye.